Hello, I'm Harley Schlanger. Welcome to this week's webcast of the Schiller Institute, featuring the founder and president of the Schiller Institute, Helga Zepp-LaRouche. Helga, and just looking at the world in the past couple of days, it's clear there's been a worsening of the strategic situation. Much of this has to do with what you might call a neocon offensive, but it seems to be verging toward a real crisis. And I want you to catch us up on that to get started.
Yeah, so while there were these hopeful signs about Korea, that the conflict could be solved in a détente manner, because North Korea and South Korea had many exchanges on the cultural front around the joint delegation to the Winter Olympics in Seoul. Also joint ice hockey teams, and in general, the Red Cross started to bring families together again. So this looked all very promising. But then, unfortunately, the situation is being totally hyped up now, because there was a conference in Vancouver where between the US and Canada, they invited altogether 20 foreign ministers of all the countries which were the allies of the United States in the Korean War from 1950 to 53. And such countries as Greece and Cyprus were invited, but not Russia and not China. And this was obviously seen as an effort to reinstitute a military alliance against Russia and China in this case, which was met with very sharp criticism from these two countries. And this comes in the context of, North Korea warning that the United States has started tunnel drills, preparing an invasion. And they are using for this the 80th and 101st US Airborne Division. Oh, there's a storm here right now. And these were used for the invasion in Iraq and Grenada. So they're warning this. And then there is a very sharp article by the Chinese Global Times referring to all of this, where they start off by saying, 2017 in terms of US-Chinese relations was much better than expected, because the good understanding between President Xi and President Trump, they had 3 face-to-face meetings, they had many letters and phone call exchanges. But then they basically say that the difficulty is that you are not talking with the United States of Europe, of the United States, but a divided states, which is, a total division between the pro-Trump and the anti-Trump people. And then they basically say that, the US is becoming increasingly uncomfortable with China because China is becoming more confident and the United States is absolutely not used to that. Then they expect that the trade war, or the talk about trade war, will increase as the GOP is expected to use the trade deficit issue in the election campaign of this year. But then they say that the fact that North Korea has made such unexpected advances, referring to the fact that it's now nuclear power with ICBMs, that this has crossed the red line for the United States, and that they would prepare for a showdown this year. I mean, they're just saying it like that. And then they also say that sanctions against China will not function because half of the products exported from China into the United States come from firms which are American firms. And then in the very end, they say that the US National Defense Authorization Act 2018 includes the intention to strengthen the military relation with Taiwan, have US-Taiwan Navy exchanges, and then they say when the first US aircraft carrier docks in Kaohsiung port, that will be the moment the PLA will force the unification of China by military force. So I find this quite worrisome. And you had this Hawaii false alarm, and we should talk about that in a second. But that was also commented by Chinese media, saying that this is a warning sign that there is obviously a full-fledged prepared plan for a military war with North Korea. And then 3 days later, you had this so-called false missile alarm in Japan. So I think this is all a reflection that the situation is really very much unstable. Tillerson at this Vancouver meeting rejected the double freeze offer by Russia and China. And even Trump, in an interview with Reuters, said that maybe there is no peaceful solution for North Korea. So I think that these are all incredibly warning words and signs.
Well, it also seems as though there's a bit of schizophrenia here, because at the same time, President Trump had a very positive discussion with President Xi Jinping, I think 2 days ago. And you have the motion in South and North Korea, where the South Korean president last week praised President Trump. Now, at the same time, you have this growing chorus against China. The Economist back in December had a story about China's sharp power and that China's infiltrating and menacing American universities, recruiting people through what? The Confucius Institute, doing such subversive things as teaching Chinese to Americans. So there's definitely something afoot here. But Helga, you mentioned the Hawaii situation. Do you have anything more on that?
Well, I think this was, it's now well known. There was this alarm that nuclear missiles would be in flight against Hawaii. And then all the people started to look for shelter, call up their relatives because they thought that this is the last time they can talk to them. And only after 38 minutes, the message was getting through that this was a false alarm. So Tulsi Gabbard, the Democratic Congresswoman from Hawaii, made a very important statement about that. She said that obviously this idea that you could have an instant nuclear war has everything to do with the crisis in Korea, and that the only way how to stop it would be for the United States to stop the policy of regime change. Because as long as Kim Jong-un is convinced that to be a full-fledged nuclear power is the only way for North Korea to avoid the same fate like Saddam Hussein and Gaddafi, this problem will continue. So she demanded an immediate end to this policy. And also, I already mentioned that Global Times said this is a signal that there is already a full-fledged war preparation for a US military conflict with North Korea, which obviously could easily get out of hand. So I think this is a very, this article also mentions, by the way, that the US forces are on high alarm all the time. And, if you have minutes to either stop a crisis or, it could get out of control, I think we are in a very, very difficult and very dangerous moment again.
And another part of that is the discussion of a new U.S. strategy towards Syria. After both President Trump and Secretary of State Tillerson said the U.S. policy is not regime change, it appears as though they're again bringing this up, the fact that Assad must go. Why is that happening now?
Well, there seems to be a reassertment of neocon policy in the Trump administration. Because, as you said, there was many times said that the focus on Assad would no longer be there. But now Tillerson, in a speech in the Stanford University Hoover Institute, basically talked about a new Syrian strategy. He said it was a mistake for the United States to prematurely leave Iraq in 2011. We will not make this mistake again. and the US will stay there for an indefinite period of time until ISIS would be defeated completely and Assad would be replaced. Now, this is unacceptable because this is a sovereign government, and this is basically a precursor for a new crisis around Syria. Then also there is a new military conflict where Erdogan and also some other politicians in Turkey have accused the United States of militarily supporting a group which the Turkish name as terrorists, because there are certain members of the PKK involved and so forth. And there are already Turkish tanks and troops being deployed right now. And basically Erdogan said that this is a plan to divide Syria. And another spokesman said this is a plan to divide NATO because this is unacceptable for Turkey. So this is all part of a similar escalation like we see it around North Korea. And I think it has everything to do with the fact that you have this absolute coup insanity against Trump in the United States. And it seems that he is sometimes being surrounded by such people. I mean, Trump's policy was, and that has been acknowledged by Putin and Xi Jinping, to improve the relationship with Russia and China. But there are these vacillations which are very, very worrisome.
Well, in talking about the neocons, some of the institutions involved in this, the attacks on China and Russia on their press arms, or it's not even their press arms, but Russia Today, the Global Times, and so on. This is coming from the National Endowment for Democracy, which was very much involved in the coup against Ukraine. You also have the Hoover Institute, as you mentioned. So it's the same old networks, and these are the people Trump ran against in his presidential campaign. You mentioned the Mueller investigation. Do you think that this is a major part of the resurgence of neocons, the trying to pin Trump down and keep him totally tied up with this investigation?
Yes, I mean, I think the British newspaper, The Spectator, which already 1 year ago basically said that these forces will not stop to try to neutralize Trump, and they had said either by getting, a coup against Trump, by impeachment, or by assassination. One option, obviously, is to pin down Trump so that he capitulates to these neocon policies and get him reined in, as they say, into the existing transatlantic geopolitical policy. I mean, I don't think that is the end of the whole story, but I think the coup forces are clearly not yet defeated. I find it quite remarkable that somebody who doesn't like Trump at all, Ray McGovern from the FIPS, Veterans for Sanity in Intelligence, or something like this, is it called, that even he said this is a clear coup, what the FBI is involved, and only somebody who is completely blind will not see it, that it's a coup involving British intelligence against the sovereign government of the United States. And there is also now a growing number of congressmen who demand prosecution against Klepper for his role in all of this. And the ongoing hearings in the Congress may lead to indictments, to special prosecutor against the people who are doing this. So it's not decided, but I think we better stay alert.
Well, Clapper has also been running around saying that Russia and China are attacking the, quote, very fundamental underpinnings of our democracy, unquote. So he's someone who's very much involved. And on this same note, I just picked up a story today that spokesman for Barack Obama said that he's going to play a prominent role in the 2018 elections. Now, in some ways, he never left, because hasn't he been one of the people coordinating the whole Russiagate story?
Yeah, he moved into a house somewhere at the outskirts of Washington to be practically the leader of this resist movement. And, I think people have forgotten. I mean, what is the danger now is that Trump falls back into the same policies which were absolutely characteristic for the Obama administration in respect to the escalation in Syria and so forth. And people should remind themselves that it was Obama who had, all these drone attacks, a complete state of illegality. And, this is very worrisome, because the problem is that there is right now nobody appearing in the United States who is, capable of implementing the kinds of policies which we are campaigning for in the United States very hard, which is, the immediate ending of the danger of a financial crash through Glass-Steagall and the 4 laws which my husband has designed already several years ago. So, it's really an appeal to our viewers to refer to us, because I think that what is lacking right now is a positive leadership for the United States.
Well, I think it's not a coincidence that this new escalation is occurring as the warning signs of a new bubble popping have emerged. And this is having a profound effect in the United States, because we have a possible government shutdown coming up. They're playing games with that. These are all diversions, because the real issue is, why are we still tolerating the Bush-Obama policy of protecting Wall Street and destroying the physical economy? I mean, that's the basis of the mobilization around the 4 laws. If you could just say a little bit more around that, because we do have our organizing teams are on Capitol Hill. We have a new pamphlet on LaRouche's 4 laws, and this is the unique solution to this crisis.
Yeah, because, you have right now the beginning of the exploding of the corporate debt bubble. There was a huge firm in Great Britain which just is folding up. Then you have the Steinhoff Group in South Africa, which has ramification for many major banks who had significant losses. And that has all to do with the fact that you have a corporate debt bubble, which is much, much worse than in 2008. And the situation is simply much worse in terms of all the parameters than 2008. The very interesting author Nomi Prince, who used to be a high-ranking management person of Goldman Sachs, she has now written her 6th book called Collusion: How the Central Banks Are Rigging the World Markets, where there is a preview available. The book will come out only in May, but she describes as a real insider. I mean, she said that, she was working for Goldman Sachs for 15 years. And as she was climbing up the career ladder, she came to know how criminal the activities were on the higher level of this bank and all the other banks as well. So she decided to not pursue this career any longer and instead become part of the solution. So she is a whistleblower, so to speak. And she described how after 2007, 2008, the Federal Reserve and the other central banks, by issuing 0 interest rate money, putting on the liquidity pump, alone since 2007 and 2010, pumped $16 trillion into the system. And as we know, this is still going on to the present day. So that money naturally did not go in real investment of the real economy, but that basically gratis money, that money for absolutely no cost, was used by the big banks and the big corporations in large part to buy back their own stocks, which naturally increased the profit of these people by incredible margins. So they became richer and richer, but the corporate debt bubble became also bigger. And this is now about to start to explode. Anything could trigger that. So we are sitting on a powder keg. And as you say, I think there is a direct, connection between the worsening of the financial crisis and the willingness of these same people to go for military adventures, which could lead to World War III. Because obviously this geopolitical faction does not want to see a situation where China and the Belt and Road Initiative is growing, the Chinese economy is doing excellent, all the countries which are cooperating with China are doing excellent, while their own system is collapsing. So I think there is an immediate connection between the danger of a new financial crash and the military escalation. So that makes our own intervention globally very important, but our colleagues in the United States in particular, they are deployed, they go to the Congress, they had many meetings in both houses of the Congress, they are deployed to go to the state capitals, and they basically have many meetings, and we have a brochure out going through the need for the implementation of these 4 laws and why the United States must join with the new Silk Road in a new paradigm. So that mobilization is really important, and the good thing is that we find more and more people who are really trying to understand the principles involved, why a Glass-Steagall is absolutely urgent, why you need to go back to Hamiltonian national bank and credit system, and why you need a crash program in space and fusion technology in order to increase the productivity of the economy. So people are trying to understand these concepts and show a bigger seriousness, and naturally we hope that this also will influence the surroundings of the State of the Union address, which Trump will give on the 30th of January. But we need a mass mobilization of people who really urge their representatives, their senators and congressmen to go for this, because the problem is the Democrats are generally not far away from Wall Street, and the neocons in the GOP neither. So it does require a very strong mobilization from the base of the population.
And just a couple of figures to amplify what you were saying. In the last 5 years, corporations have added $4.5 trillion to their debt. So it's now over 14 trillion. And of that, 2.7 trillion was used to buy their own stocks. So more than half of the lending to corporations went directly into stock purchases. And that's why the stock market is up. And that's why it's a bubble. Now, Helga, I'd like to pose a simple question to you. It's not really that simple, but in the face of all this insanity, you've remained a fountain of optimism. And a lot of people communicate with me and they say, well, what is it that you guys know that we don't, that we pessimists don't know? And I think this is an important point, because we were talking before the program about the Chinese intervention in Latin America, in Africa. There's so much going on that Americans don't know about, but where does this optimism come from?
Well, it comes from several sources. Let me first talk about the objective one, and then I come to the subjective one. Objectively, when you look at the world from the top, so to speak, I mean, if you don't look at it from inside the United States or inside Germany or some other country, but look at it from the overall historical process which is unfolding right now, you see a clear division. You have in the transatlantic world, people generally expect that the future will be worse, that the coming generation will be, or generations will be worse off than them, that is a foregone conclusion. After all, they are told that the resources are limited, that you have to have, more restraints and saving and, all of this kind of ideology. And naturally, if you look at the social injustices, the rate of poverty in the United States, in Europe, even in Germany, every 6th child is poor. An unbelievable situation in countries like Italy, Spain, Greece, you have youth unemployment of 50, 60%. So people have a grim perspective of the future. And you have, in large part, politicians who have absolutely nothing to offer as a vision for the future. I mean, the best example for that is right now the never-ending coalition talks in Germany, which are going on already more than 4 months since the election. And none of the parties has said one single word, what should be the future of Germany? Where should the world be? So people generally are desperate, they're frustrated, they think, you know, things get worse, and then they see all these calamities in the world and they say, I can't even look at the news anymore, it's all terrible. But that is only half of the truth, or less than half of the truth, because if you look at the world from the standpoint of China, you see a completely different vector of developments. I mean, first of all, China has undergone the most incredible development. They have lifted 800 million people out of poverty in 20 years. They want to eradicate poverty until 2020 entirely. They are doing wonderful things in Africa, in Latin America, in other Asian countries, even some European countries. So there is a sense of confidence, you know, there is a sense that there is a future. And then Xi Jinping at the recent National Congress of the 19th National Congress of the Communist Party laid out this vision, you know, where should China be in 2020, in 2035, and 2050, where he laid out an incredible vision that by that time China should be a fully modern, strong, socialist country where the people are living a happy life, that it should be culturally advanced, scientifically strong, and that people not only in China should have a happier life, but around the world. Now, we know that the economic underpinning of that vision is progressing with the Belt and Road Initiative, building infrastructure, building R&D centers, industrial parks, energy distribution and production. So this is all a realistic perspective, but it has a cultural dimension to it. They want to have a space Silk Road, a cultural Silk Road. So these are all initiatives which have given the Chinese people a tremendous sense of confidence, and that is a spark which has jumped over, so to speak, to the other countries who are participating in the Belt and Road Initiative. Now, obviously, as I mentioned in the beginning, these very stark warnings for this year around North Korea, Taiwan, and similar situations shows that the Chinese are not naive, and they are willing to react and react to defend their interest. So it's not all rosy and without a realistic view, but the way how people go about it is absolute one of optimism. And I think, for most people in Russia, they have the same attitude. This is why the popularity of Putin is, at the high level of over 80% as it is, despite the difficulties of the sanctions and so forth. So I think the difference is if you have a mission and if you have a vision for the future, and then you are optimistic, because then it is in your own will and power to realize those visions. So I think there is a clear division in the world population on this issue. Now, I wanted to say something about the subjective reasons why I'm, despite all of these dangers, fundamentally very optimistic. And that is because, there is no point to worry. You have to have a vision where you want to contribute with your life to the improvement of the human species. And I have a vision, which is not exactly the same like that of Xi Jinping, but my vision is also, very much like that of my husband, with whom I'm working on this since more than 40 years, that we have a world where every human being on this planet can have a decent life, can have a fulfillment of all of the potentialities which each person has, and that mankind can become adult, and that we go back to the values which are characteristic for the American Revolution, for the German classical period, for the Italian Renaissance, and other high points of culture. And I'm optimistic that we can retrieve these qualities by having a cultural renaissance of classical music, of classical poetry. And since China is on that road already, by reviving the Confucian tradition, by having a lot of emphasis on classical culture and on scientific breakthroughs, I think that the West should just really rethink what were our contributions to the advancement of universal history, and then revive them, and then have a dialogue of cultures among the best traditions of all countries. And I think this is the human nature. I don't think the idea of geopolitics or ravings and rantings like we hear it from Ted Cruz right now, that is not what makes us human. I think we should not regard other cultures as an enemy per definition. China has reached out and said, let's join for a shared future of mankind. We are a community of destiny. And I think this idea of a joint humanity, of one mankind, that is what we have to accomplish if we want to exist as a human species. But I think it is in the human nature that once you have the will and a good plan, and many people are working together for the good plan, you can succeed.
Well, I would recommend to our viewers that this winter, instead of catching the flu, people catch the Silk Road spirit. Helga, that brings us to a close. Thank you very much, and we'll see you next week.
Yes, goodbye.